I have discovered in my life that if I am operating at capacity, so I'm working on a book and I'm, you know, taking care of things around the house, and then I'm doing one other project, and then I'm doing one other project, I can continue to do all of them well. But then the cliche is the straw that broke the camel's back. If you add one more thing to that, then it's not merely that one thing goes away, but everything falls apart. So, for example, if I'm operating at capacity and then all of a sudden my car craps out, even though the car crapping out merely involves taking it to the, getting a tow truck to take it to the garage and then having them fix it, that one thing, it's not that I simply have to replace, do that instead of one of those things, but instead what happens, I've discovered over and over and over my entire life, is that when you add one more thing, everything falls apart. And it's not just me. I've talked about this with friends, and a lot of them are the same way. They can comfortably be juggling. It's like juggling. They're comfortably juggling three balls, and then you put in one more ball, and they can't juggle any of them anymore. And that reminds me of something that I read when I was writing Endgame that I thought was really interesting, which was the earlier concept of ecosystem collapse or natural community collapse, and also how toxins work in a system, was that you would get 1 unit of damage for every 1 unit of toxin. Or if you have 1,000 acres and then you cut 1 acre and then you cut another acre and then you cut another acre, each one of those would do 0.1% damage to the forest. But it ends up, that's not how natural communities work at all. It ends up that the community will do everything it can to maintain some sort of stasis, and then all of a sudden collapse when it can no longer support the damage. So if you cut 1 acre, it may actually not do 1 unit of damage. It may, the forest may be able to recover that. That's what happens with a hurricane or something. And and this shouldn't have surprised any of us, because this is how bodies work. If I scratch myself, if I am walking through the blackberries and I get a cut, I'll bleed a little bit, but a week later, I might not have any memory of where that was because it's healed. It has done long-term zero damage, zero injury. But what if instead I'm being cut and cut and cut? There is a point where the body can take it no longer. The body keeps recovering and recovering, and then at some point it collapses and you die. And I remember when I was writing Endgame, I was discussing this with a friend who is a psychologist, who said that family systems work the same way. That if you have, whether it's a healthy family system or an abusive family system, they will attempt to maintain some sort of stasis. And whether it's a healthy stasis or an unhealthy stasis, they'll attempt to maintain that. And it can absorb a fair amount of it can be fairly resilient in that place of stability. And then once it reaches a certain tipping point, all of a sudden there can be cascading system failure. And the same is true, by the way. I learned this, it kind of, well, it horrifies me and also kind of cracks me up that when I was in college back in the early 80s, so it's 40 years ago, we were learning about global warming. And the science was settled on global warming when I was taking it. And it was really, in many ways, it was understood 200 years ago, 150 years ago. And anyway, so it's just, we've wasted a tremendous amount of time collectively. Anyway, one of the things that I was taught in a class on solar heating and cooling was that you can look at he drew sort of a wave function on the chalkboard and talked about how you can sort of oscillate, and it will oscillate within the trough, but if you push the CO2 levels past a certain point, there will be a runaway to a new equilibrium point. And this is something that people who have been studying global warming all understand. There are certain tipping points reached that move it to a new stasis, a new stability point. And again, the same thing is true with bodies, that if you can get a little bit of damage on your leg, and that's not a big deal. But if the damage is severe enough, they have to cut off your leg. And then eventually you can heal, but you still are at this different stability point. And if that happens too much, then obviously you die, and that's your new stability point. And this is also true for social systems larger than family. This is true for an entire economic system, that it can't, I mean, this is just sort of one of those things that it's a general principle that applies in so many different circumstances where, you can have an economic system that can survive a certain amount of stress. Survive's the wrong word, since the economic system doesn't lie, but it can absorb a certain amount of stress. But then if there's too much stress, there will be some sort of runaway inflation, runaway depression. There will be some sort of massive change to the system. So it's very interesting too, and this can happen too with revolutions or riots or anything, where there can be all sorts of provocations that lead to nothing, and then all of a sudden there can be a trivial provocation that is just the last one that will then flip the entire system into a different mode. And I, on the other hand, I want to caution us with this, that doesn't mean that the 100th monkey story is true. That's a fable and is not, in fact, literally true. And I also wouldn't count on simply having 100 and then 101 and then 102 and then 100,000 people thinking nice thoughts suddenly transforming society into a different way. I just think that it's the sort of quantum, by which I'm not meaning, sort of the hoity-toity way that they say that quantum mechanics is our key to understanding dreams or any of that sort of mystical stuff. I'm just meaning quantum in terms of quantum being a unit, sort of a step function almost, that I do think that change does happen because things are going along seemingly fine, but then you add one more stressor and everything shifts suddenly.